Millionaire was 10 seconds from arrest, but the cleaning woman changed his fate. Richard Harrison felt the sweat dripping down his forehead as the officers approached with handcuffs already prepared. His company, one of the largest construction firms in New York City, was being investigated for embezzlement of public funds, and all the evidence pointed directly to him. It was then that a woman's voice cut through the tense silence in the main hall of his Beverly Hills mansion. "Wait!" shouted Betty Johnson, the cleaning woman who had worked there for 2 decades. "I have something you need to see." The officer in charge of the arrest looked at the woman in her early 50s, dressed in her pink uniform and green apron as if she were invisible. "Ma'am, please step aside. We are executing a warrant." "But it's about these documents," insisted Betty, holding a yellowed folder. "I know who really embezzled the money." Richard, who until then had been resigned to his fate, felt a spark of hope. For all these years, he had barely noticed the presence of that woman who cleaned his house daily. Now, for the first time, he looked directly at her. "What documents are these?" asked the officer, frowning. Betty took a deep breath. She knew that moment would change everything, not just for Richard, but for herself. For years, she had observed the conversations, the phone calls, the papers thrown in the trash. As someone who was always treated like furniture, she had ended up becoming a witness to everything that happened in that house. "They are the original receipts for the transfers, and also the recordings." "Recordings?" Richard's eyes widened. The officer hesitated. From experience, he knew that often the biggest revelations came from unexpected sources. He signaled for them to wait. "Explain further, ma'am." Betty opened the folder with trembling but determined hands. "My name is Betty Johnson. I have worked in this house for 20 years, since Mr. Richard still lived with his parents. I saw this company grow, I saw the meetings, I saw the arguments, and most importantly, I saw when everything started to go wrong." Richard watched in silence, still in shock. How had he not noticed that she paid attention to everything? 3 years ago, I started hearing strange conversations between Mr. Robert, Mr. Richard's brother, and the company accountant, Mr. Frank. They always met here in the library after Mr. Richard left on his business trips. Robert Harrison, who was present in the room, turned pale. "This is absurd. An employee trying to—" "I recorded everything," interrupted Betty, taking an old recorder from the folder. "My daughter gave me this device when my husband got sick, so I could record the doctor's instructions. I ended up using it for something else." The silence in the room was deafening. "Why didn't you say anything before?" asked Richard, still processing the information. Betty lowered her eyes. "Because you never spoke a word to me in all these years, except to give cleaning orders. And because I was afraid of losing my job. My husband Jack has been hospitalized for 2 years. The medications are expensive. My daughter Patricia studies at night to graduate in nursing." Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The officer examined the documents Betty presented. They were copies of bank transfers, all signed by Robert Harrison and Frank Williams, the accountant. "How did you get these documents?" "Every Friday I cleaned the office. They always left papers in the wastebasket. My mother always said you shouldn't throw away written paper without reading it. I started keeping everything that seemed important." Robert stood up abruptly. "This is absurd. Are you going to believe a cleaning woman instead of me? I have a degree in business administration and have been a partner in the company for 15 years. And I have a degree in accounting from Boston University," Betty retorted, surprising everyone. The revelation landed like a bomb in the room. Richard stared at her in disbelief. "You have a degree in accounting?" "Yes, sir. I graduated 10 years ago, studying at night while I worked here during the day. But when my husband got sick, I couldn't find a job in the field. I needed something immediate with a signed work card to be eligible for the health plan." Robert tried to head for the door, but the officer stopped him. "I think it's best if you stay here while we review this material." Betty turned on the recorder. Robert's voice echoed through the room. "Frank, you need to alter these reports before the audit. If they discover we diverted $2 million to the account in the Cayman Islands, we're finished." Frank's voice replied, "Robert, this is getting too dangerous. If your brother finds out—" Richard will never find out. He trusts me blindly. And even if he gets suspicious, he's the company president. Any investigation goes straight to him. Richard felt the world spin. His own brother had orchestrated everything so that he would take the blame. "Robert, why?" The younger brother, cornered, exploded. "Because you were always Dad's favorite. You were the one who inherited the presidency. You were the one who got all the opportunities. I was always just Richard's brother. I deserved some compensation." "You almost destroyed our family," murmured Richard, visibly shaken. Betty continued playing the recordings. There were dozens of them, detailing the entire scheme. Frank confessed how he had manipulated the accounting books to hide the embezzlement, always directing suspicion toward Richard. The officer carefully examined the receipts Betty had saved. "Mrs. Betty, do you understand that these documents may have saved an innocent man from prison? I only did what was right. I couldn't let a person pay for something they didn't do, even if that person never noticed I existed." Richard approached her, his eyes watery. "Betty, I don't know what to say. You saved not only my freedom but my reputation, my company, my family. You don't need to say anything, Mr. Richard. I just hope this ends soon, because I have to go to the hospital to see my husband." The simplicity of the answer touched Richard deeply. For 2 decades that woman had been invisible to him, but she knew him better than his own family. The officer took Robert into custody and ordered that Frank be located for questioning. Before leaving, he addressed Betty. "You will be essential to the case. We will need your testimony. I'll be available." After everyone had left, Richard and Betty were alone in the hall. An awkward silence hung in the air. "Betty, You don't need to say anything, Mr. Richard. I'm going back to my work." "No!" he exclaimed. "You are not going to continue being just my cleaning lady. Not after what you did for me." She looked at him with a mixture of surprise and distrust. "What are you trying to say?" "I want you to be the new accountant for the company. Actually, I want you to be the chief financial officer. You know every detail of our business better than I do." Betty shook her head. "Mr. Richard, I appreciate the offer, but I can't accept. People will say it's just gratitude. Besides, I have my responsibilities here." "And who said you can't keep coming here?" "But as an owner, not as an employee." "An owner?" Richard picked up some papers from his desk. "I want to transfer 20% of the company's shares to you. You deserve to be a partner after all this." "I can't accept that, Mr. Richard. It's too much." "Betty, you need to stop calling me Mr. Richard. We're the same age, and you didn't just save my company. You know it better than I do." Betty sat down heavily in a chair, still processing everything. "My daughter won't believe it when I tell her." "Where does she study?" "At the private university nearby. Nursing. It was always her dream. She works at a clothing store in the morning and studies at night. She's a real fighter." "How did I never know this?" "Because you never asked." The sincerity of the answer was like a punch to Richard's stomach. He had lived next to that woman for 2 decades but had never been interested in her life. "Tell me about your husband." Betty sighed. "Jack worked his whole life as a construction worker. He helped build half the buildings in this area. 2 years ago, he discovered a heart problem. He had to stop working. Since then, I've been supporting the household alone." "And how did you manage to graduate while working here?" "I studied from 11 at night until 2 in the morning, every day. On Saturdays, I went to the college library. It took me 6 years to graduate, but I did it." Richard felt smaller and smaller in the presence of this woman he had underestimated so much. "Why did you choose accounting?" "Because I always liked numbers, and because I thought I could have a better future. But when my husband got sick, I had no choice. You have the qualifications, you have the practical experience from our company, you have the integrity that our board lacks. Please accept my proposal." Betty was silent for a few minutes. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. But in the meantime, I want you to know that starting today, you are no longer my employee. You are my special consultant, with a matching salary. Mr. Richard." Richard. Just Richard. That afternoon, Richard did something he had never done in 20 years. He sat in the kitchen with Betty and had a coffee while they talked about the company, about the employees, about the problems she had noticed over the years. Mrs. Mary from accounting always stays later to check the reports that Mr. Frank delivered. She suspected something. Why did you never tell me? How? You walked past me in the hallway as if I were invisible, and Mrs. Mary was afraid to speak directly with you. Richard began to realize that he had built an invisible barrier between himself and his employees, a barrier that almost landed him in jail. How many employees are dissatisfied? Most are just doing their jobs because they have to, but they don't feel valued. Mr. John from the construction site always comments that no one from the board has ever visited a site. And you? How did you feel? Betty took a long time to answer. Invisible, as if I didn't exist, but at the same time I had a purpose. This house, this company, somehow they were part of my life too. Richard realized there were many more people like Betty in his company, dedicated people he had never noticed. Tomorrow, I want you to accompany me on a visit to all departments. I want to meet every employee. Are you sure? I am, and I want to start with our construction sites. Betty smiled for the first time since they had known each other. Mr. John will be very happy. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about how blind he had been all these years. His company had over 200 employees, but he only knew the directors personally. The next day, he kept his promise. Accompanied by Betty, he visited every sector of the company. He was introduced to employees who had worked there for more than 10 years and whom he had never seen. Mr. Richard, this is Mr. Carl, our most senior construction foreman, Betty introduced. Carl, a man of about 60, greeted Richard with surprise. It's an honor to meet you in person, Mr. Richard. The honor is mine, Mr. Carl. How long have you worked with us? 15 years, Mr. Richard. I helped build Newtown Estates, the downtown mall, Pinecrest condominiums. Richard was impressed. That man had been essential in the construction of some of his most important projects, but they had never met. During the visit, he discovered fascinating stories. Mrs. Mary, from accounting, had detected inconsistencies in Frank's reports months ago, but didn't know how to report her suspicions. John, from the warehouse, controlled the inventory with impressive precision, saving thousands of dollars on unnecessary purchases. How could I have been so disconnected from my own company? He asked Betty during lunch. You were always very focused on the big deals, the million-dollar contracts. You forgot that it's these people who make everything happen. And you remember all these details? When you are invisible, you observe a lot. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us who are just starting out. Now continuing. A few weeks later, Richard received a call from the authorities. Robert and Frank had confessed everything. The scheme had lasted 3 years and involved not only embezzlement, but also overbilling on public contracts. Mr. Richard, I would also like to speak with Mrs. Betty, said the prosecutor. Her testimony was crucial to clarifying the entire case. She will be available. There's one more thing. We discovered that Mr. Robert tried to sabotage other company projects to further damage your reputation. Richard fell silent. His brother's betrayal had been deeper than he had imagined. What will happen to him? Probably prison. The embezzled amounts are significant, and the damage to the company's image will also be taken into account. After the phone call, Richard went to look for Betty. He found her in the office that had been Frank's, organizing documents. How are you settling in? I still feel strange sitting at a desk instead of cleaning under it, Betty laughed. But it's interesting to see the numbers from a different angle. And have you decided about my partnership proposal? Betty stopped organizing the papers and looked at him. Richard, I need to tell you something. All these years I didn't just observe, I studied. I learned about your business, about the market, about the company's problems. Go on. I know exactly where our company's weak points are, and I know how to fix most of them. Our company? If you really want me as a partner, then it is our company. Richard smiled. Tell me about these weak points. Betty opened a folder. First, we waste 30% of our materials due to a lack of proper control. Second, we have unmotivated employees because there is no recognition. Third, we lose contracts because our bids are not competitive. And the solutions? Implement a real-time inventory control system, create an incentive program based on productivity, and review our cost structure. Richard was impressed with the precision of the analysis. How long did it take you to reach these conclusions? 20 years observing and 2 years studying the numbers. I accept all your suggestions, and I accept you as a partner. Betty extended her hand. Then we have an agreement. The next day, Richard called a general meeting with all employees. For the first time in the company's history, all hierarchical levels were present in the same room. I want to introduce to you the new partner and general controller of the company, Betty Johnson. The murmur was general. Many employees knew Betty, but they were surprised by the promotion. I know it might seem strange, Richard continued, but Betty saved not only my freedom, but our company, and more importantly, she knows this company better than any of us. Betty stood up. Good afternoon, everyone. Many of you know me as the woman who used to clean the offices. Now, I'm going to clean up our management. The joke drew laughter from the audience. I want you all to know that my door will always be open. Any questions, any suggestions, any problems, you can talk to me directly. Mr. Carl, the construction foreman, raised his hand. Mrs. Betty, are you going to change a lot of things around here? I will change what needs to be changed, Mr. Carl, but nothing will be decided without hearing from you first. After the meeting, many employees approached Betty with suggestions and questions. For the first time in years, they felt they had a voice in the company. Mrs. Betty, said Mary from accounting, I always wanted to talk about those inconsistencies I found in the reports. Now you can talk, and I want you to come to me whenever you notice something strange. Mrs. Betty, called John from the stockroom, can I suggest some suppliers who offer better prices? Of course you can, John. Schedule a meeting with me sometime this week. Richard watched from a distance, realizing he had underestimated not only Betty, but his entire team. That night, Betty arrived home later than usual. Her daughter Patricia was waiting for her in the living room. Mom, is it true that you became a partner in the company? It's true, honey. I can't believe it. You always said studying would change our lives, but I never imagined it like this. Betty hugged her daughter. And it will change yours too. You won't have to work mornings and study at night anymore. You can focus entirely on your studies. Mom, I'm so proud of you. And I'm proud of you, my dear. How is Dad taking it? I haven't told him yet. I want to surprise him tomorrow at the hospital. The next day, Betty arrived at the hospital accompanied by Richard, who had insisted on meeting Jack. Jack, this is Richard, my boss, my partner. The man, visibly weak but with alert eyes, greeted Richard. It's an honor to meet you, Richard. Betty always talked about the company, but I never imagined you would become partners. The honor is mine, Jack. Your wife saved my life. She was always special. When we got married, I was just a bricklayer, but she saw potential in me that I didn't know I had. She encouraged me to take courses, to learn new techniques. I built some of the most beautiful buildings in the city because of her support. Richard understood where Betty's strength came from. She told me you're going to have an important surgery. Yes, but it's expensive. We've been saving money for 2 years. Richard and Betty exchanged a look. Jack, said Richard, as Betty's new partner, I can cover the cost of your surgery. Consider it an investment in my business partner's health. Jack began to cry. I don't know how to thank you. No need to thank me. You raised an extraordinary woman who saved my company. 2 weeks later, while Jack was recovering from surgery, Richard and Betty implemented the first changes in the company. The inventory control system was already showing results, reducing waste by 25%. The numbers don't lie, commented Betty, analyzing the reports. In 3 months, we will have saved enough to give everyone a 15% raise. Are you sure? I am, and that will motivate our team even more. Richard smiled. You know, Betty, I don't think this company has ever had such efficient management. It's not just management, Richard. It's respect. When people feel valued, they work better. At the end of the month, the company received 3 major public contracts, something unprecedented since the scandal. How did you manage it? Richard asked the commercial director. It was Mrs. Betty. She restructured our budgets in a way that allowed us to be competitive without losing quality. Richard looked for Betty in her office. It seems you are working miracles. They're not miracles. It's just 20 years of observation being put into practice. Betty, can I ask a personal question? Of course. Don't you feel angry for having been ignored for so long? Betty thought before answering. In the beginning I did, but with time I learned that holding on to anger only hurts ourselves. I prefer to use that feeling to motivate myself to study and improve. You are a better person than I am. No, Richard. We are different people, with different experiences. The important thing is that we are now working together. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like the video and especially to subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot, as we are just starting out, now continuing. 3 months later, the company had not only recovered from the scandal, but was having its best performance in the last 5 years. The transformation was visible: more motivated employees, more efficient processes, and a reputation that was being solidly rebuilt. Richard, said Betty one morning, I need to tell you something. What is it? I received a job offer. A competing company wants to hire me as general director. Richard felt his heart race. Are you going to accept? No, but I want you to understand what this means. Explain. It means our transformation here has caught the market's attention. It means we are on the right track. And it also means you could earn a lot more money somewhere else. Richard, money isn't everything. Here I have something I wouldn't have anywhere else, the chance to really make a difference in the lives of people I've known for 20 years. Richard hugged her. Thank you for staying. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. That same day, Richard made an important decision. He called a meeting with the remaining board members. I want to announce that I am stepping down from the role of CEO of the company. There was a general silence. I'm not leaving the company, but I want to assume only the role of chairman of the board. The CEO position will be taken over by Betty. Richard, protested the financial director, are you sure? I am absolutely sure. In the last 3 months, Betty has proven that she knows this company better than any of us. And most importantly, she has the trust of all the employees. When the news spread through the company, the reaction was euphoria among the rank-and-file employees and surprise among the executives. Betty accepted the position on one condition. I want to implement a program where any employee can present ideas directly to the presidency, and I want that at least once a month I personally visit all of our work sites. Richard agreed to everything. There's one more thing, said Betty. I want to create an employee assistance fund for cases like my husband's, where someone needs medical help. Excellent idea. How much are you thinking of allocating? 5% of the monthly net profits. Approved. 1 year after Richard's near arrest, the company was unrecognizable. Revenue had grown 40%, employee satisfaction was at record levels, and Betty had become a leadership reference in the industry. You know, said Richard during one of his weekly visits to the office, sometimes I think my arrest would have been the best thing that could have happened. Why? Because it made me realize that I was living in a bubble. I was running a company without knowing the people who made it work. And now I know the name of every employee. I know their families, their difficulties, their dreams. Betty smiled. And they know they can count on you. Can I tell you something I've never told anyone? Of course. That day when you showed up with the documents, I thought you were just someone trying to take advantage of the situation. And what changed your mind? The way you spoke. There was no personal interest in your voice. There was only justice. I only did what was right. And it changed all our lives. That late afternoon, Richard accompanied Betty to the hospital where Jack was having physical therapy. The man had completely recovered from the surgery and was stronger than ever. Richard, said Jack, I don't know how to thank you for everything. You don't need to thank me, Jack. You have an extraordinary wife who saved my life. And you gave her the opportunity she deserved. Actually, she always deserved it. I was just 20 years late to realize it. Patricia, Betty's daughter, had graduated from nursing school and gotten a job at the same hospital where her father was treated. That day, she was on duty and came to greet them. "Uncle Richard," she had called him that since they met, "did Mom tell you the company is opening a medical clinic for the employees?" "It's true. Your mother suggested it, and we thought it would be an important investment in the well-being of the whole team. And who will run the clinic?" "We were thinking of you, if you're interested." Patricia's eyes widened. "Seriously?" "Completely serious. You know our employees' needs, you have the right training, and most importantly, you have the right values." "The right values?" "The same values as your mother. Honesty, dedication, and love for others." Betty hugged her daughter and her son-in-law, Richard. "Our family has grown so much this year." "Son-in-law?" laughed Richard. "You saved my husband, gave my daughter a future, and treated me like family. If that's not being family, I don't know what is." That evening, during dinner at Betty's house, something that had become a weekly tradition, Richard reflected on how his life had changed. "Jack, can I ask you a question?" "Of course, Richard. How did you manage to raise such a close-knit family, even with all the financial difficulties?" Jack looked at Betty and smiled. "Love and respect, Richard. When you truly love a person, you see them for who they are, not for what they have." "And trust," added Betty. "We always believed in each other, even when things were tough." "I envy you," admitted Richard. "I had everything materially, but I didn't have a real family." "You do now," said Patricia. "We are all your family." Richard felt his eyes well up. For the first time in 40 years, he felt he belonged somewhere. 2 years after the incident, Richard was invited to give a lecture at a university about business management. He brought Betty as a co-speaker. "Students," Richard began, "today you will hear the story of how I was almost arrested for a crime I didn't commit, and how a woman I ignored for 20 years saved not only my freedom, but taught me the true meaning of leadership." Betty added, "And you will hear how 20 years of silent observation can turn into the greatest opportunity of someone's life." During the lecture, they told the whole story. The students were fascinated, especially with the transformation of the company after Betty took over as president. "Professor Betty," asked a student, "what was the biggest challenge when you took over as president?" "Making people understand that I was no longer invisible," laughed Betty. "Some employees took months to get used to seeing me sitting in the president's office instead of cleaning it." "And how did you manage to regain the market's trust after the scandal?" "Total transparency," answered Richard. "Betty implemented a system where all the company's processes are audited monthly by an external firm, and the results are published on our website. Besides," added Betty, "we invited our biggest clients to see our gardens, our employees, our processes. We showed them in practice that we are different." At the end of the lecture, many students came up to ask personal questions. "Professor Richard, didn't you feel humiliated being bossed around by a former employee?" Richard thought before answering. "At first my ego was a little hurt, but I soon realized I wasn't being bossed around. I was learning. Betty taught me that leadership isn't about giving orders, it's about serving people." "And you, Professor Betty, didn't you feel like getting revenge after so many years of being ignored?" "Revenge is a feeling that gets you nowhere," answered Betty. "I preferred to use my experience to build something better." On the way back, Richard and Betty talked about the lecture. "Did you notice how impressed the students were with our story?" "I did. And I also noticed that our story can inspire other people." "What do you mean?" "I'm thinking about writing a book about all of this, about how invisibility can be a school of observation, about how pride can blind people, about how it's never too late to start over." "That's a great idea. We can write it together." "You would do that?" "Of course, after all, we're a team now." That night at home, Betty mentioned the book idea to Jack. "You should write it, love. Your story can help a lot of people." "But will people even be interested?" "Betty," Patricia intervened, "your story is about hope, about never giving up on your dreams, even when circumstances are tough. Everyone needs to hear that. And it's also about recognizing people's worth," added Jack. "How many bosses treat their employees the way you treat each other now?" Richard, who had been invited for dinner, agreed. "Jack is right. Our story might make other companies rethink how they treat their employees." "Then it's decided," said Betty. "We're going to write this book." A few months later, while working on the book, Richard and Betty received an unexpected call. Robert, Richard's brother, was getting out of prison after serving his sentence and wanted to talk. "Do you want to see him?" asked Betty. Richard hesitated. "I don't know. It still hurts to think about the betrayal. Maybe it's time to forgive." "How can you forgive so easily?" "Because holding on to anger only hurts me, and because I believe people can change." Richard agreed to meet Robert at a coffee shop near the company. His brother was visibly ashamed. "Richard, I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, but—" "You don't need to ask for forgiveness, Robert. You need to explain why." Robert looked down. "Envy, anger. I thought I deserved more recognition, but mostly pride. I couldn't accept that you were always better than me. I never wanted to be better than you, Robert. I wanted us to be partners. I know that now. Prison made me think a lot." Richard looked at the brother he hadn't seen in 2 years. "What do you plan to do now?" "Start over. Far from here. I want to set up a small business in a small town. Start fresh, without the shadows of the past." "Do you need help?" Robert was surprised. "You would help me after everything? You're my brother, Robert, and I've learned that family always forgives." Betty, who had waited outside, approached the table. "Robert, I remember you from when we were younger. You were always smart and capable." "Mrs. Betty, I apologize for trying to harm you too." "You don't need to apologize. What's important is that you learned from your mistakes." Richard decided to help Robert start a small construction supplies business in a small town in Pennsylvania. Not a big investment, but enough for him to start over with dignity. "Why are you doing this?" Robert asked before leaving. "Because I've learned that forgiveness frees both the one who forgives and the one who is forgiven." 3 months later, Robert called to say his small business was doing well. "Richard, thank you for giving me a second chance." "Thank you for taking it." The book by Richard and Betty, titled The Power of Invisibility, became a national bestseller. They were invited to television shows, to give talks at companies, and even to an international conference on leadership. "I never imagined our story would go this far," commented Betty during an interview. "I think it's because people relate to it," Richard replied. "Everyone has felt invisible at some point or has ignored someone important." The company continued to grow. 5 years after the incident, it had become one of the largest construction firms in the state, but it maintained the values of closeness with the employees that Betty had implemented. "Betty," Richard said one day, "do you know the most important thing you taught me?" "Tell me." "That leadership isn't about being superior, it's about making people feel important. And you taught me that it's never too late to recognize our mistakes and change." That evening, as they walked through the construction site of their newest project, a low-income housing development, Richard and Betty watched the workers. "You know," said Betty, "sometimes I think about what our lives would be like if none of this had happened." "How so?" "If Robert had never tried to harm you, if I had never found those documents, you would still be invisible, I would still be arrogant, and our company would still be just a business without a soul. Do you think it was fate? I think it was consequence. 20 years of your observation met a moment of my need, and from that, something much bigger than both of us was born." Betty smiled, watching Mr. Carl teaching construction techniques to a group of young apprentices. "Look at Mr. Carl. When you first met him, he said he always wanted to teach. Now he's our lead instructor. And Mary from accounting became our internal auditor. And John from the storeroom is finishing his business administration course. You know what this means, Betty?" "What?" "That you didn't just save a man from prison, you freed an entire company to be what it was always meant to be." As the sun set over New York City, Richard and Betty returned to the company. In the main lobby, there was a plaque that Betty had installed. "A company is made of people. When we take care of the people, we take care of the future." "Richard, can I confess something?" "Of course." "That day, when I showed up with the documents, I was more nervous than I had ever been in my life." "Why?" "Because I knew that moment would change everything, not just for you, but for me too. And it did. It did. But you know what else changed? What? I finally felt seen. Richard stopped and looked at her. Betty, you know I will never be able to see you as invisible again, right? And I don't want to be invisible anymore. I learned that our voice has power when used at the right time. And I learned that true leaders are those who see potential where others see only employees. That night, during the weekly dinner at Betty's house, Richard made a toast. To the family we choose, to the second chances we give and receive, and to the proof that it's never too late to start over. And to the certainty that the most important people in our lives are sometimes right in front of us, just waiting to be noticed, added Betty. Jack, fully recovered, raised his glass. And to my wife, who always knew she was worth more than the world recognized. Patricia added, to my mother, who taught me that studying and persevering always pays off, even when it takes 20 years to show results. 10 years after the incident, Richard was preparing to retire for good. The company, under Betty's leadership, had become a national benchmark in human management and social responsibility. You know, he said during his farewell party, I always thought I was building buildings. Today I know I was only building walls. The ones who really build are the people. Betty, now recognized as one of the most respected executives in the country, gave a speech. Richard taught me that recognizing our mistakes is the first step toward getting things right, and that true wealth isn't measured in money, but in the difference we make in people's lives. The party was held at the construction site where it had all begun. Hundreds of employees, former employees, suppliers, and clients were present. Mr. Carl, now the company's training director, made a point of speaking. Mr. Richard, when you first came to our site, I thought, finally our boss wants to meet us. But then I realized you didn't just want to meet us, you wanted to learn with us. Mary, the former bookkeeper who had become an auditor, also spoke. Mrs. Betty always used to say, Mary, you have good ideas, don't be afraid to speak up. It was the first time in 15 years at the company that someone had told me that. Richard, emotional, gave his final speech. When I was 10 seconds away from prison, I thought my life was over. Today I know it was only just beginning, because it was in that moment that I learned what really matters. People, end of story. Now tell me what you thought of this story of overcoming adversity and how the union between such different people can transform not just lives, but entire companies. Have you ever experienced a situation where someone who seemed invisible ended up being fundamental in your life? Leave your opinion about Betty's attitude in the comments and whether Richard did the right thing by forgiving his brother. Your story can inspire other listeners. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more touching stories like this one.